In my last video, I promised that this one would be all about rust repairs. And me, I'm a man of my word, so this video will be nothing but rust repairs from the beginning all the way to the end. But before we begin, I feel like I should mention that I am no expert. Pretty far from it. Honestly, the patch panel I'm about to make in this video, it's actually my first patch panel ever. So if you are looking for a step-by-step tutorial on how to make a patch panel for your Chevy van floor, this video might not be for you. But if you're here to join me on my adventure into the uncharted territory of rust repairs and patch panel fabrication, you're in for a good time. Together we will tackle all the challenges, probably make a few mistakes, and hopefully learn a thing or two. Let's get to it. This is the state of the rear floor of my van. Quite some rust and filled with gaping holes. So I went to town on it with a hammer and die grinder. I'm using a hammer to find all the spots that's totally rusted out, and the die grinder to get underneath the paint to see where the rust ends and the healthy metal begins. Instead of tackling the whole floor at once, I found this little section that's isolated from the rest, and I decided that this will be the perfect spot for my first patch panel. I cut out a piece of 0.9mm steel sheet. That's 20 gauge. Maybe I should have gone with a thicker sheet, I don't know. Actually, if you see anything throughout this video that could be improved, let me know down in the comments. We are all here to learn. Anyway, I went on to cut out my little patch panel. And this is where I might be taking things a bit too far. As you can clearly see, the floor is corrugated. You can also see right here that someone has been here before me putting in some patch panels. They just put in flat panels, and I could do that too, but I won't. You see, I think that this is a perfect spot to practice making a bit more advanced patch panels. Since this floor will be covered up anyways, no one will see if I mess up. On the other hand, no one will see if I make a perfect job either. But I can live with that. There will be plenty of other places where my rust repairs will be clearly visible, so I need all the practice I can get. In order to make these corrugations, I have actually got myself a new tool. Some of you might already have spotted it here in the background. It's a bead roller. Let's take a closer look at it. If you don't know what a bead roller is, it's this tool, and it's used by highly skilled professionals to make bends and curves and patterns into sheet metal, using these wheels called dies. And I am not skilled nor a professional, but I do my best. But I immediately ran into a problem. You see, even though this machine came with a ton of dies, I couldn't find a combination that let me make the exact shape I needed. I'm sure it's in here, I'm just not experienced enough to find it. There are tons of dies that you can buy out there, but I went the easier route. Maybe not the easier route, and probably not the cheaper either, but I made my own, using my 3D printer. This is my own custom die set, made to get exactly the same bend as the van floor, printed out of PETG. And they are actually holding up pretty well. I have already made a few panels and they show no signs of cracking. I guess we will see how they hold up once I'm done with all the panels for the entire floor, but that's a problem for the future. Let's get back to this patch panel. I marked out where I wanted my bends and ran it through the bead roller once, with pretty light pressure. And then once again with full pressure. I then marked out the second band and gave it the exact same treatment. I didn't catch it on camera, but I actually flipped the panel over and ran it through once again. And that made the bends even sharper. The shape of the two dies are exactly the same, so I can run the panel through whichever way I want. Next, I rounded the corners of my panel. And honestly, I'm not sure that was such a great idea. The theory is that they will pull less when being welded, and I'm sure that's true, but it also made the hole in the floor way harder to cut out. Maybe it makes more sense when you have a bigger panel and you can make the arc on the corners wider. I don't know, let me know what you think. I then painted the underside with zinc spray, just to prevent it from rusting, but still being able to weld it. I traced the final panel shape onto the floor and went at it with the angle grinder. I must say, this step actually went better than I expected. I was sure that I will end up with a terrible mess and huge gaps, especially in the rounded corners. Sure, a thinner grinding disc would have helped, and I have actually ordered those already. Here's an interesting question for those out there that actually know things. What's this? Is it for isolation or for sound dampening maybe? What is it made of and what is it doing in the frame of my van? While you think about that, this is me grinding down the surface of the exposed frame. I managed to put my angle grinder into it and I wanted to weld it before closing up the floor again. Found this little piece of frame that had come loose and detached from its neighbor. I could probably just have left that, but in this project I have actually worked out a few keywords or mantras even that I try to work from. And one of those are, leave it better than you found it. So I quickly made this little piece, sprayed it with zinc, welded it in and gave it a coat of rust primer. I then sanded the edges to prepare it for welding. Before welding in the new patch, I spray down everything underneath with raw linseed oil. Yes, I am one of those hippies that believe that raw linseed oil is a good rust protector. I know this can be a hot topic, but let's focus on the rust repairs, okay? Time to weld it in place, and this is where the problem started. If you ever tried to weld thin sheet metal, you probably know what I'm talking about. Even though the angle grinder did a good job, it's not a precision tool. So my gaps were a tad too wide in some places. I also struggled with my ground and ended up welding a little tab to the floor. I used a TIG rod to fill out the gaps. In the past, I've even used stick welding electrodes to fill the gaps, but luckily none of my gaps were that wide this time around. And when I was done, I really felt like I butchered that poor patch panel. But after going at it with my angle and die grinder, it actually cleaned up pretty well. You know what they say, a grinder and paint makes me the welder I ain't. And I'm pretty happy with this result, especially considering this was my first ever patch panel. I know that I could have spent less time with the grinder in the end, but I wanted to see how close to perfect I could get it. And I'm not saying this is perfect, but I think it's good enough, and especially good enough for a floor. As you saw earlier, I have tons of patch panels that needs to get made, so I will get to it. Thank you for watching, and I see you later. Bye!